Good afternoon, everybody. Let me get this straightened out here a bit. There we go. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank you for joining us in our Bible study this afternoon. Let's go ahead and open up in a word of prayer and ask the Lord to be with us during this time together. Father, thank you for this day and for the blessings that you've given us and for the love that you've given us. Father, I just ask that you would be with us over the next couple of minutes as we study your word, as we continue our series out of Psalms chapter 23, all the days of our life. Lord, that you would just give me the wisdom and the discernment, the words to say to be an encouragement to your people. Well, thank you for it. In your name I pray. Amen. All right, now before we get started, we're going to be looking at Psalms chapter 23. We're going to be looking at all of verse 2 and then a little part of verse 3. But before we get started, I want to take care of a little housekeeping real quick. I want to apologize for the length of the Bible study this past Thursday. I was just getting into it and enjoying myself, and it wasn't that until after I had started, downloading the study that I realized it was almost an hour long, and I don't like to go anywhere near that length of time. As I was taught in seminary, one old preacher said, what you want to do is stand up, speak up, then shut up. So I do apologize for the length. I've actually got a little timer in front of me now. I'm definitely going to keep a bit more, keep an eye on that a bit more. So it won't be nearly as lengthy. So again, I do apologize for that. So let's go ahead and get started. Psalms chapter 23. Again, we're going to be looking at all of verse 2 and a little bit of verse 3. David writes here, He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. Then verse 3, He restoreth my soul. And these three statements, if you will, kind of go hand in hand. They go hand in hand with each other. They complement each other. So I want to look at some examples here of, He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leads beside the still waters. He restores my soul. Really what he's talking here is how he provides us comfort. He helps us when we are weary, when we are tired. And those times come. If they haven't come yet, trust me, they're going to come. And the Lord actually, God's word talks about what we really need to do. And he gives us some examples of how the Lord will take care of us during those times. So there are three I want to look at. There's many more than that, but there's three specifically I want to look at. If you go with me back a little further earlier in the Bible, go with me to the book of 1 Kings. 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, then 1 Kings. When you get to 1 Kings, I want to look at chapter 19. We're going to specifically be looking at verses 1 through 7. Now, I want to give you the layout of what's going on here. So we have the prophet Elijah. Now, in chapter 18, some may be familiar with this, others might not. So I'm going to give you a cap here. The king of the nation at that time was Ahab. His queen was Jezebel. And they weren't necessarily all that concerned about following or listening to the Lord. On the contrary, they were very much into idol worship. And they were into idol worship as well. They were into, they were trying to kill Elijah, quite frankly. And so Elijah went to Ahab and gave him a challenge. He says, tell you what, get your prophets for your God. And then I'll come. Let's go to a mountain called Mount Carmel. And we're going to have a challenge. So he's like, all right, so there's 400 prophets of the idol Baal. Or Baal is what they would call them. They went up to this mountain. And Elijah said, all right, I want you to make this stone altar, and then I want you to put a sacrifice on it, and then I want you to start praying and see if fire will come down from heaven. And it was about 9 in the morning they started, and they prayed all day. I mean, they were praying, they were wailing, they were even to the point of cutting themselves. And at one point, Elijah started mocking them. They're like, "Oh, well, he's like, what's wrong? Where's the fire? Oh, well, maybe your God has taken a nap, or maybe he's gone on vacation, or whatever." And he's mocking them. And then finally, about 5 o'clock, he's like, "All right." About 4 or 5 o'clock, he's like, "All right, enough's enough. Now it's my turn." So he builds an altar, and then he digs a trench around this altar. And he has some people, some of his assistants, go and get water. And they dump it on this altar. Now, mind you, he's wanting this to set on fire. Well, obviously, the last thing you want to do is put water on wood and make it wet. It's not going to burn. Well, he even put so much water on it to make his point, it filled that trench. And then after he did that, let's see if I can find the prayer here. Yeah, it's like a 48-word prayer. He said, "Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that thou art God in Israel, and that I am thy servant, and I have done all these things at thy word. Hear me, O Lord. Hear me, that this people may know that thou art the Lord God, and that thou hast turned their heart back again." That was it. That was a prayer. In verse 38, and the fire of the Lord fell and consumed not only the sacrifice, it consumed the wood, it consumed the stones, it consumed the dust, and it consumed the water that was around the trench. So 48, these false idol prophets, they prayed all day, nothing. Elijah gives a 48-word prayer, and fire comes down from heaven and consumes everything. Well, not impressed. Jezebel, this is where we're going to pick up. Pick up with me first. I promise I'm watching the time. 1 Kings chapter 19. Verse 1, and Ahab told Jezebel that all that Elijah had done, basically with the fire, and withal how he had slain all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger unto Elijah, saying, "So let the gods do to me, and more also, if I make not the life as the life of one of them by tomorrow around this time." In other words, she's saying, if you're not dead by this time tomorrow, I pray that God's take my own life. Basically, he's a marked man. He's a dead man. So picking up in verse 3, and when he saw that, he arose and ran for his life, and came to Beersheba, which belongeth to Judah, and left his servants there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, and came and sat down under a juniper tree. And he requested for himself that he might die, and said, "It is enough now, O Lord. Take away my life, for I am not better than my fathers." Poor Elijah, he'd gone through a series, not just with Mount Carmel, but he'd gone through a series of battles and confrontations to the point, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. He's exhausted. He's had it. He's done. He literally is saying here, in verse 4, he says, "It is enough." He said, "I've had it." We've all been, I know I myself have been to that point where I've sat in a chair, honestly weeping and saying, "That's it. I've had it. I can't do it anymore. I can't do it anymore." But let's continue. Verse 5. Verse 5 says, "And he lay and slept under a juniper tree. Behold, and an angel touched him and said unto him, Arise and eat. And he looked, and behold, there was a cake baking on the coals, and a cruse of water at his head. And he did eat and drink, and laid him down again. And the angel of the Lord came again the second time, and touched him, and said, Arise and eat, because the journey is too great for thee." God knew that Elijah, physically, he had it. He needed rest. And so he had led him to a juniper tree. And he fell asleep under the shadow of this tree. And while he slept, the Lord sent an angel to bake him some food, and provide some water. Now, when it says wilderness here, it's not like what we think of as a wilderness, in the Rocky Mountains. This is a deserted place. This is like a desert. Think of like in New Mexico or Death Valley, California. Not a whole lot of trees, period, much less water. Well, God led him to a place, basically an oasis. Led him to a place where there's a tree. Let him sleep, got him some water, baked him some food. He drank the water, he ate the food, went back to sleep again. Got to let him sleep a little bit longer. Then the angel woke him up. There was some more food and some more water, and said, you need to eat because you're going to have a long journey ahead of you. So we see here that not only did God provide for Elijah what he needed, the rest that he needed from what had gone on before, he had provided him rest to prepare him for the next journey or the next storm that lies ahead. And so when those times come in our lives, David promised us in Psalms 23, he makes us to lie down in green pastures. He lead us beside the still waters. He restoreth our soul. God knows what lays ahead. We don't, but he does. And so we can take that comfort in knowing that God isn't going to give us more than what we can handle. And when that time comes, and we're going to talk about this here in just a moment, when that time comes where we need to take a break, we need to be willing to listen to the Lord and stop and take that break and and just rest. Not just for the storms that are behind us, but for the storms that are to come. Next one I want to look at, these next two, or last two really, are both going to be in the book of Matthew, the first book in the New Testament, the book of Matthew. The first one we're going to look at is in Matthew chapter 4. Matthew chapter 4. We're going to read verses 1 through 11. Matthew writes here in chapter 4, again, verse 1. Then was Jesus led of the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil. And when he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, he was afterward and hungered. And when the tempter came to him, he said, If thou be the Son of God, command that these stones be made to bread. But Jesus, he, being Jesus, answered and said, It is written, Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. Verse 5, Then the devil takes him up to a holy city and set him on the pinnacle of the temple, the very highest part of the temple, and said unto him, If thou be the Son of God, cast thyself down, for it is written, He shall give his angels charge concerning thee, and in their hands they shall bear thee up, lest any time thou dash thy foot against a stone. Jesus said unto him, It is written again, Thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God. Again, verse 8, Again the devil will take him up to an exceeding high mountain, and showeth him all the kingdoms of the world and the glory of them. And he said unto him, All these I will give unto thee, if thou just fall down and worship me. Verse 10, Then said Jesus unto him, Get thee hence, Satan, for it is written, Thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve. Then the devil leaveth him, and behold, the angels came and ministered unto him. So Jesus himself went through trials. He went through temptations right here. 3 times Satan went up to him. First time, he's been fasting for 40 days or 40 days and 40 nights. Basically just drinking water, some grape juice, that's it. Really no food. So after 40 days, you tend to get a bit hungry. So, Satan goes up to him and says, Hey, look, if you're God, there's some stones down there. Why don't you turn them into bread? Jesus came back with him with his word. Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. He was quoting Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 3. So the second time, Satan takes Jesus basically to the highest part of the temple and says, go ahead and jump down. basically Satan turns around and says, okay, you want to quote your word? I'll quote your word. I'll play that game. Jump off the temple. Your word says that, the angels have charge against the, they're going to protect you from kicking accidentally a stone. And quoting out of Psalms chapter 91, verses 11 and 12, Jesus comes back with his word again and says, thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God. And then finally, the coup de grace, the piece de la resistance, Satan takes him up to a high mountain, and in a supernatural flash of the eye shows him all the kingdoms of all the world. And say, look, I will give all this to you. You can have it. All you've got to do is bow and worship me. And then again, Jesus says, he basically says, look, Satan, just get out of here. God's word says, thou shalt only worship the Lord thy God, and him only shall he serve. So Satan himself tempted him 3 times, and he resisted the temptation. Now, we face temptation in our lives. Most of the time, it's not necessarily Satan. Maybe one of his demons or just our own sin nature. But Satan himself was testing Christ. I doubt, seriously, there's anybody on this planet that could withhold that kind of temptation. I could be wrong, but it'd be extremely difficult. And Jesus was so exhausted by that point, his word said that the angels came and ministered unto him. So I want you to keep that in mind as we look at this last one, Matthew chapter 14. So just go 10 chapters over. Matthew chapter 14. We're just going to look at 2 verses. Verses 22 and 23. This is going to be, now prior to this, Jesus had fed at least 5,000 people. It said 5,000 men, not counting women or children. So 10 to 15,000 people is not out of the question. He fed them with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Great miracle. So, and not only that, he'd been teaching the people. And personally, I'll tell you, you tell any preacher out there worth their salt, even getting up, standing behind a pulpit and just preaching a 30-minute sermon is exhausting. Jesus was teaching the people conceivably several hours. And so he is absolutely just drained. He is absolutely drained. For a preacher, the equivalent to this for a preacher would be when we do a funeral, especially somebody we know. Most preachers I know, when they do a funeral, they clear their calendar because they know by the time they're done, they're going to be drained. So Jesus here is drained. And so in verse 22 it says, and straightway or immediately, Jesus constrained or encouraged his disciples to get into a ship, to go before him on the other side while he sent the multitude away. Verse 23, and when he had sent the multitude away, he went up into a mountain apart to pray. And then when evening was come, he was there alone. So, of course, his disciples are helping him. He knows his disciples need a break. And so he's encouraging his disciples. He's telling them, look, get you a boat, the Sea of Galilee, and just cross the other side. I'll meet you, and I'll just meet you over there. He said, I'm going to, dismiss the multitudes and, send them on home and encourage them, and I'll meet up with you. And chances are, as he was, as the people left, I'm sure there were several that came up to him to hug him, to thank him, shake his hand, whatever. And so, a couple of hours have probably gone by, and he is absolutely exhausted. And so what he did was he went up into a mountain apart to pray. And when evening has come, he was there alone. He basically just got away, literally got away to pray, to reflect, to rest. Now, growing up, I was taught, and many people were taught this, you just don't quit. You get into a ministry, you don't give up, you don't stop, you don't quit. And while these were very good meaning people, that is extremely unwise advice. There was one teacher I had in seminary that actually taught the exact opposite, and I agree with him. He had a saying, it was very simple. You need to go apart before you come apart. What he's saying was, even, pastors, Christians, Sunday school teachers, whatever, you need to set some time for yourself. Now, some people think that that's selfish, but in reality, it's not. It is so important to take some time and take a break. And it doesn't necessarily mean, it really depends on what God's leading you to do. Jesus here, he just took a night. There was a period where Jesus took 40 days. The Apostle Paul himself, in Galatians chapter 1, prior to his salvation, he was a very religious man. He was a Hebrew. He was a Jew. And he, after Christ was crucified, buried, and rose again, he went out and killed Christians. He sought to have them slain. One of the first deacons, Stephen, he was stoned to death. Paul was holding the jackets of the men that were stoning him. The first deacon. Well, then when Paul met Jesus on the road to Damascus, he saw the error of his ways. He had what is called a come to Jesus moment. And he realized, what he was doing was wrong. What he did after that, mind you, he'd been trained for years to be a religious leader. Now he realized, I need to take a step back here. He took 3 years. He spent 3 years in the desert, literally taking a sabbatical, taking a step back and looking, okay, Lord, what would you want me to do? So for some people, your break may only need to be a week. May only need to be a weekend. It may be longer. It may need to be, like Paul, it could be 3 years. Myself, I took a sabbatical for 26 years. I worked in children's ministry. In my heart, I was prepared to go until I was 50 or 60. I've known several people that have done that. But in 2012, I was getting to where I physically could not keep up. And I knew that my time had come. But I had no idea what to do next. I knew pastoring wasn't, I prayed about maybe becoming a pastor. I had been pastor at one point prior and knew that was not the gift that God had given me. So I was kind of lost as to really what to do. And so remembering what my professor in seminary said, I had told others I was going to take a 1-year sabbatical. Well, the year came and went. I still didn't quite know exactly what God wanted me to do. Well, correction, I knew what God wanted me to do, and it was the prayer page. I just still hadn't had any idea in mind really how to get it started and what direction to go. That would take another year. But it was the best thing I ever did. And so I don't know if there's somebody out there. There very well may be somebody out there that's in that position that you have been, serving the Lord, not necessarily pastoring. It might be a Sunday school teacher. It might be choir. It could be a children's worker. It could be anything. And you're getting weary. And you're getting to the point to where you're doing this more out of habit or more as to ease your conscience. But physically, emotionally, you're just wore out. That fire that you had when you first started it is not there anymore. There is nothing wrong with stepping aside. Pass the torch. If that's really you, God has already got in mind someone that'll take your place, and He will provide. Don't think that, well, if I quit, I'm going to leave it high and dry. You may eventually, for temporarily, they may have to get a substitute, But I promise you, from experience, time and time again, there'll be somebody out there waiting on the wings to fulfill, take that time. And you may only need a month. And God may tell you that. He said, take a month off. If you tell your pastor, look, I need to take a month, I just need a break. If your pastor is worth his salt, he'll be like, absolutely, take that time. Somebody else, they'll find maybe 4 replacements for you, 1 each week until you come back. But it is extremely important that you take that time off, and God will provide. I mean, David said it right here. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. Now, if you do that, one thing I'm going to recommend, and then with this I'm going to close, I want you to go back to the book of Psalms, chapter 46. Psalms chapter 46. Now, I would encourage you to read the entire chapter. It's only 11 verses, but for time, I only want to read one verse. Psalms chapter 46, verse 10. It says here, be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the heathen. I will be exalted in the earth. If you're taking that time off, take a time off away from the ministry or whatever, absolutely. But what you don't want to do is take time off from God's word. If anything, that's a time to even more so be concentrating on God's word and have that season or that time of prayer, because you step away from that ministry, that's going to physically give you the rest, but you need that spiritual that rest. You need to be restored spiritually, and the only way that's going to happen is by spending dedicated time in God's word and prayer. So if that's you, please take that time and whatever the Lord leads, and get that rest. And if I can help you in any way, please feel free to email me. My email address again is all lowercase, Pastor Ron, the number 94 at gmail.com. Pastor Ron 94 at gmail.com. And if I can help you in any way, or encourage you, or pray for you in any way, it would certainly be my honor. Now, before we close in a word of prayer, one other housekeeping thing, and then a couple of prayer requests, and we'll be finished. This evening, about 6 o'clock Eastern, we're going to release, or the evening praise time, the Sunday evening song is going to be released. The title, it's a musical rendition of the 23rd song by a singer named Ron Hamilton. I first heard this song in October of 2001, literally less than 3 weeks after I first heard that song. My grandfather passed away, and for whatever reasons, I was listening to a Christian radio station in Pensacola at the time, and prior to his death, I heard that song probably 4 or 5 times, almost to the point where, do you have anything else in your library? It's a beautiful song, but I get it. Well, I didn't get it. What I didn't know at the time was my grandfather was going to pass away. So when he did, that song really took another meaning for me, and huge encouragement to me at the time. Well, over time, I kind of forgot about the song, but this week, I was praying, Lord, what song would do you want me to play this Sunday? Well, around that same time, one of my wife's coworkers, he had had shoulder surgery on Friday, January the 27th. That evening, it was an outpatient thing. That evening, he started having a hard time breathing, and so he went back to the hospital, realizing that he was having issues breathing. They were concerned about postoperative pneumonia, so they went ahead and admitted him. They ran several tests Saturday and Sunday, really couldn't find pneumonia, wasn't sure what was going on. Well, early Monday morning, basically what happened was he had a fat embolism. And unfortunately, that clot raced to his heart and he died. He coded 3 times. Twice they were able to bring him back, but the third time, 39. He just celebrated his 39th birthday. Leaves behind a wife, Jessica, and I believe a 2-year-old daughter, Claudia. So we were devastated. Boz was a man of God, just loved the Lord. You could look at his face and see Jesus. So we were just absolutely devastated. And as I was thinking of Boz and saying that prayer, that song came back to my mind. So I listened to it again, and it is an absolutely beautiful song. And I couldn't think of a more appropriate song, especially while we're studying the 23rd Psalm. So I normally don't really advertise the evening praise time, but I really wanted to point it out to everyone. I really believe it's going to be an encouragement and a blessing to you. So with that in mind, I'm going to go over some prayer requests, and that, well, I just mentioned Jessica and Claudia. Remember them in prayer. They buried their husband, their father. He was laid to rest yesterday. So we take comfort in knowing that he is with the Lord, but we also want to remember his wife and daughter, as well as his co-workers at West Florida Community Care Center. He had worked there for years and years and years, and this is, I really can't go into more details, but other than it's going to leave a tremendous, tremendous hole in not only their hearts, but at his work, the work that he did. It really would take, he did so much work there, it'd probably take 3 people to replace that one man. So we want to remember them in prayer. Remember Mr. Heckman in prayer. Mr. Heckman had bypass surgery on Friday. Before I went on to do a recording, I went on his wife's Facebook page to get an update, and she just updated this morning. He was able to sit up in a chair this morning. He was able to eat a little bit of food. They're not quite to the point here where he's eating what they would like to see, but he is making progress. They're hoping maybe by this afternoon he'll be able to eat some more food. Really, there's just 2 things from keeping him being discharged. Eating, and then he still has 2 chest tubes that need to come out. Once that takes place, he'll be ready to be discharged. So we're thankful he's doing well, but ask that you continue to remember him in prayer. Please continue to pray for my Uncle Kirk. His recovery is just very slow. He's really having a hard time with the recovery, and so I'm going to ask you to remember him in prayer. And then remember this church, Lawton Street Baptist Church. I was their assistant pastor from 2003 to 2004, and again from 2007 until 2008. They are currently in search of a pastor. They're actually voting on a candidate this evening. So we just ask that you would remember them in prayer, that the Lord's will be done. And then for another friend of mine, Kaylee, she had surgery back on, well, she had surgery on the 27th as well. A deviated septum, basically that bone between the nose. They had to adjust that. She was slow in recovery, was really in a lot of pain the middle part of this week, but fortunately she is doing better. But I know she'd appreciate us continue to remember her in prayer. And then, of course, on our Facebook page and on the website, we are listing Kayla and Danielle that are missing. They are still missing, no new updates. So we want to remember the authorities as well as their families in prayer. So I'm going to go ahead and close in a word of prayer, and then we'll be done. Father, thank you for this day and for the blessings that you've given us, for your word, Lord, that not only the comfort that it gives us, but literally the liberty that it gives us to be able to take a break, to be able to step back, and that you encourage that, Father. Lord, I just ask that you be with those that are listening today, either through YouTube or through our Facebook page, Father, that this message will encourage their hearts, Father, And if there's one that doesn't know you as Savior, that they'll come to a saving knowledge of you before it's too late. And we ask that you be with these prayer requests. We think especially of this wife and daughter who buried their father and their husband, their father yesterday. You'll minister to them, Father. And those that are going through illness, that you will provide healing. And for this church, Lord, that is going to be voting on a pastor tonight, that your will be done. And to everyone that's watching, Father, I commit them to your loving care. And we'll thank you for it. In your name I pray. Amen. All right. Thank you again for watching. We'll be back with you again on Thursday. We'll be continuing our study on Philippians chapter 4, verse 8. And until then, have a great week and God bless.